I'm going to get so much hate for messing with the beloved green owl, but it's okay. I've seen so many students waste their time on Duolingo that I cannot remain silent. Hola, soy Alejandro de KeySpanish, and in this video I'm going to give you the 5 main reasons why you shouldn't be using Duolingo and what to do instead. First, most of your learning on Duolingo is based on translations, with exercises like this where you are presented a sentence in Spanish and you have to drag the translation in English word for word. Even if there are sentences, this creates a very bad habit of word-by-word translation, as I have already mentioned on my video on how to think in Spanish. Don't get me wrong, some translation-based learning is effective, especially if you are a beginner, but it should not be the main focus of most activities you do. And even for complete beginners, with content that is very, very basic, there are much more meaningful ways of engaging with the language. Let me give you a couple of examples from my course, Spanish Accelerator. Even if you're learning something as basic as numbers from 0 to 10, there are some engaging activities that we can do. For example, instead of just going 1, 1, 5, 5, I can tell you that, well, you have a calculator that's broken, and you have to run these calculations by yourself. So, for example, 2 más 4 es igual a 6, 8 menos 1 es igual a 7. So you are engaging now with different numbers and you are thinking a bit. So it's a bit better than just translating. Or let's imagine that there is a raffle in Cáceres and you have to click on the winning number for each series when you listen to the audio.
El número ganador de la serie 3 es el 88542.
So which number in the series did you hear? Well, 88542. Let's say you are learning the colors, amarillo, naranja, rojo. Again, instead of just going red and yellow and orange, you can think of the flags of certain countries and tell me which colors are they. So this flag would be verde, blanco y rojo, right? So negro, rojo y amarillo. This is just to show that no matter how basic the content, there are ways in which you can engage with the language without translating constantly. But that's far from the only issue I have with Duolingo. Many of the sentences you are learning are just not natural. This is not the way people speak or things people would say. This goes from subtle examples like esta guitarra es muy interesante. This guitar is very interesting, which you may be able to say that in a situation where you want to speak about the history of the guitar or some very nuanced details about it. But that's not relevant for a complete beginner learning how to say something is interesting. And goes for more obvious examples where sentences are just ridiculous, like no necesito leer tus términos y condiciones para aceptarte. I do not need to read your terms of service to accept you. So many of the sentences on Duolingo are just weird or not natural. And there is a website with the 100 weirdest sentences there that is quite funny. One more reason is that the grammar explanations are insufficient or even worse, misleading. And to exemplify this, you have the lesson on ser and estar, where they tell you, don't let ser and estar scare you. You can remember it this way. Pretend that T in estar is for temporary. And again, in the same lesson, they tell you use ser for descriptions of people and things, and use forms of estar for temporary states or being and locations. Ser and estar is a complex topic, and these descriptions are not only insufficient, but as I said, they can be misleading. And that's why in one of the units of my course, we do cover this in more detail, and we make fun of this. Ser es para hablar de cosas permanentes and estar de cosas temporales, this star-temporary relationship, by an example of, well, mi abuelo, que en paz descanse, está muerto y no creo en la reencarnación. My grandfather, rest in peace, is dead, and I don't believe in reincarnation, because we use estar to say that someone is dead. And you can argue that to be dead is not a temporary state. So there is much more to ser and estar than temporary and permanent, and we go through, again, in the course in more detail to talk about the concept of identifying and circumstances. And well, it's not the point of this video to explain this, but just to tell you that with grammar explanations in Duolingo, you need to be careful, right? First, they are insufficient and sometimes can be misleading. However, the main reason I think students should not be using Duolingo or many other apps for that matter as the main source of their learning is because they lack context. By context, I just don't mean a sentence. That's not enough. You can have a perfectly fine sentence like mis amigas son españolas in the lessons about possessives, right? To learn my friends are Spanish. That's a natural sentence. That's okay. But even that, the sentence level is not enough. We are missing important information like what's going on, who is talking to who, what's the tone of the conversation, and many other important things. People communicate with coherent text or spoken situations that have much, much more context. And again, I'm going to show you an example from my course. If while we are trying to learn our possessives in Spanish, like me or tus, then instead of just working with isolated sentences like mis amigos tienen no sé qué, mis padres son españoles. Let's imagine a situation in which Sergio is going for the weekend to the Teatro Romano de Mérida and is talking to his wife to make sure that she knows what she's going to do. So she exchanges some text messages with her. Este fin de semana voy al Teatro Romano de Mérida con mi alumno John. This weekend I'm going to the Teatro Romano de Mérida with my student. And then is asking, and are your nephew coming or is his girlfriend coming? And whatever it is. But in this case, instead of a sentence isolated there, you at least have context for a conversation that has lots of possessives. So this is much more meaningful. Or let's say you're trying to learn the vocabulary for describing people. Instead of going, yo soy alto, and I am tall, tú eres guapo, you are handsome, then we can have a real situation with context, like John looking for a partner and setting up a profile on a dating app where he's describing himself. Soy inglés, vivo en España, soy amable, generoso, soy alto y delgado. So we are learning there in context some vocabulary. And then you have the profiles of different girls that he's looking into. And you have more context for soy un poco reservada al principio. Tamara says, mis amigas dicen que soy muy simpática. Or Inés talks about being muy activa. So you can see that the words are now presented in a real context, not just in an isolated sentence. And this is probably the most important thing Duolingo and other apps are lacking, presenting you with language that allows you to interact in a way that represents real life, with real situations. And the last reason why I believe you should not be using Duolingo is a bit more controversial, because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. We say in Spanish, un arma de doble filo. And it is that it creates a false sense of competence. And this happens because many times the options you are given for the answers are quite obvious, right? So if you want to say, nunca estamos tristes, we are never, and the other options will be words like grandparents or music for the word sad, then, well, the answer, again, is quite straightforward. And then you have, estamos felices con el trabajo nuevo, we're happy with the new work. Then the options are, me too, or more bread, please. So it's not that you are having to think very hard most of the time to answer these questions. And again, more examples, Saturdays, sábados, mirar, cine. It would be better if at least they tell you, okay, sábado or domingo, Saturday or Sunday, and you can get confused. But Saturday or to look or movies, cinema, I don't know. And with hours, it's horas, once or domingos. So the options presented are there too straightforward, in my opinion. Another thing particularly concerning to me is their speech recognition. I think it's good that they allow you to speak and practice and say things out loud, but I have tested this and the speech recognition is very, very forgiving, which again, I understand it's okay, you want to be flexible with students, but I have tried just butchering a sentence and it recognized it as correctly. And then after going through a couple of exercises that with very obvious answers, so speech recognition that you can say almost anything and get it right, then, well, you are impressive, you are awesome. Which, as I said, es un arma de doble filo. It's a double-edged sword because I do believe positive reinforcement is very important and you want students to be enjoying the process and to have just a good time doing it. And you want to reinforce that. But this is like a kid that is playing basketball. I understand that when he is starting out, you have a basket that is lower according to his age, and that's okay. But what Duolingo is doing is like creating a giant hoop where you can almost never miss. And what happens is that when real life comes by, then what you learn really does not transfer to that real life. And unfortunately, this is something I have seen happen too many times where students come to me after 6 months of Duolingo and I ask them about their level and they believe they are like intermediates. And then you try to speak to them and they cannot formulate one sentence or understand very, very basic questions. So their image of their level is really not accurate because Duolingo gives them this impression of competence that, unfortunately, again, it's not realistic. But however, I do appreciate the fact that they are trying to reinforce and make it enjoyable. So those are the 5 main reasons why I believe you should not be using Duolingo. First, emphasizes word-for-word translation too heavily. The sentences presented are not natural, sometimes straight up ridiculous. Also, grammar explanations are insufficient or worse, misleading. And the most important one, they lack context, real-life context for the things you are learning. A sentence, even if it's a good sentence, is not enough. There is more to it, and you have to learn with real-life situations. And as we have just mentioned, this false sense of competence can be tricky. So if you are looking for some entertainment that feels like learning in your bathroom breaks, then okay, keep using Duolingo. But if you want to actually learn Spanish effectively, what can you do instead? If you want to stick with mobile apps because, well, you are busy and it's comfortable and you don't want to commit that much time, better options could be Busu, which presents you with a bit more natural language, and they have a nice community feature where you can get feedback on your text and also your audios. And Speakly, it's an app that I like that presents you also with sentences, but they are more natural, they have better speech recognition and grammar explanations that are more thorough and in context. However, both of these apps still lack the context at the level we have discussed and still rely a bit too heavily on translations. But as far as apps go, these two are the best ones I have seen. And you have to consider that in the case of both Busu and Speakly, to get the most out of them, you have to pay for the premium subscription. In case you don't want to or you can't spend any money on your Spanish learning, there are still some things you can do that are better than Duolingo, like watching some Dreaming Spanish on YouTube, an excellent channel for input. There's an audio program called Language Transfer that is free and that is quite good. And you can find exchange partners for free on apps like Linkbee or HelloTalk. And for those of you who are beginners or just know a few basics of Spanish and want to get a solid foundation of the language, an alternative, as I have shown throughout the video, is my course, Spanish Accelerator. However, it's definitely not for everyone. It's not a game and it's not cheap. It requires commitment, but there is nothing more comprehensive out there. I don't want to make this video a sales pitch, so I will leave a link in the description with the details of the course. We open enrollment a few times a year, and you can join a waitlist to get notified when we do so. And I want to finish this video by recognizing some positive things about Duolingo. First, you can do most of it completely for free without paying anything. You get most of the features and you can have a complete learning experience there for free, which is very nice. And Duolingo Stories and Duolingo podcasts are quite good resources. However, when it comes to being the main source of your learning, I think it's time to ditch the green arrow, even if that means losing your beloved streak. And that's it for today's video. Please, if you disagree, if you have found success with Duolingo or you have a different point of view, let me know in the comments. I would love to learn from different perspectives. And if you want to get straight to insulting me, that's fine too. I can take it. Soy Alejandro de KeySpanish y nos vemos en clase.